right, good afternoon, everybody. Calling to order Environmental Matters Committee meeting for 14th of November already. All right, for the record, all the members are present. Gonna modify the agenda a little bit, just the order. But in any case, could I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion.
Ooh, my phone
anyone
approves,
opposed?
That was a
Motion
confirmation.
carries. We have minutes from October 10th. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? Motion carries. And then we're going to fast forward to appointments. We have AP 1824. Is Mr. Aaron McCready here?
He is.
All right, could you please come up to the table and turn on the microphone, make sure the light is green, and then just state your name and address for the record, please.
Bright green. Bright
Try
green.
push it again.
Is
There
it
we go.
Yeah,
How about that?
that's better.
My name is Aaron McCready, here for the Conservancy Board.
And can you state your address for the record?
17 North Cherry Grove, Annapolis, Maryland.
Is that your ward?
In Ward 4.
Say that again?
Ward 4?
Ward 2, Carmen O'Neill,
Oh, the other side.
Oh, okay.
South
North
Cherry.
Cherry Grove, next to the Bush Library.
Next to what?
The Bush Library?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I
the other
always,
side of
I always
South
forget
Cherry.
it's split.
Two pieces
Yeah.
of it. That's okay.
Well, welcome, and yes, we have your application for for the Conservancy Board. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself? Personally, I'm also interested in hearing about your business, Keystone Streams, but can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you are interested in serving on the Conservancy Board?
Yeah, certainly. I have always been very focused on environmental matters. Educated at University of Virginia and moved here about 8 years ago. Currently, I am the founder and CEO of a company called Keystone Streams. We're focused on implementing riparian forest buffers, so forest buffers along waterways throughout the Chesapeake Bay. They're very large goals through the EPA and state programs to implement that work, and so we're focused on doing that at scale. This includes some of the activities that the Conservancy Board would have, such as easement, documentation, real estate matters, and things of that nature. Prior to founding Keystone, I spent 8 years at a company called Hannon Armstrong, which is a local investment firm where I led the ecological restoration unit of that business, invested over $90 million in ecological restoration assets over a 3-year period, including a large number of transactions in wind and solar energy. So I'm very familiar with climate change issues, real estate matters, conservation discussions and efforts.
Great. Are there any questions for Mr. McCready?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Your resume is wonderful. We're glad to have good quality people volunteering to be on these matters. The thing that I'm focusing on more than the environmental, though, is the financial. Many years ago, we had a 2-day seminar down at CERT on resiliency. And the first day was about all the different resiliency things we needed to do. But the second day was people from Wall Street telling us how we could finance resiliency projects. And basically their summary message to us was, if we can find ways for the city or governmental entities to underwrite the risk, they can finance environmental projects for a very low interest rate, as low as 5%. And with your background, it seems like you really can help fill in that information for us. So I'm delighted to see the financial part of your resume as well as the environmental part, of course. So very interested in that.
Yeah, thank you. Certainly happy to have any discussions about the details of what that might look like. Yeah. Certainly climate resiliency is going to be a part of every city's conversations as we move forward and see greater impacts of climate change.
Right.
Do you have any questions?
Well, I do have one question about
Please.
your view on our city dock plans.
You know, I'm going to be honest, I have not read them in great detail, unfortunately.
You're not the only one who hasn't seen a great deal of detail, so
Say
don't
that
feel
again.
bad.
Say that again.
But I said you're not the only one who hasn't seen a great deal of details. We've seen the beautiful pictures, and we're still trying to fill in the blanks. But I just wondered, with your environmental background as well as your financial background, if you had an opinion on helping us move forward.
Yeah, I'd love to take a read through it and get back to you with more feedback if you'd like. Yeah, I don't have anything off the cuff.
That's
just because
okay.
I
That's just-
haven't read it in detail.
And that's not relevant to really
The Conservatives Board.
what you're here for.
No.
But
I do think there's a great opportunity to make City Dock, more approachable and more resilient, and reduce some of the impervious surface and add greenscapes and make it more inviting for people who come down. So, yeah.
Great answers.
Yeah, I do just another question about your business, the shoreline, the buffer restoration. Do you do? I'm just interested in more like what type of restoration do you do? Is it tree planting or just enhancement of existing vegetated buffers?
Yeah, it's almost exclusively tree planting.
Okay.
And there's a reason for that. Typically, there's a lot of activity, and you may know this, going on in stream restoration, which includes getting a permit from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which oftentimes is a 3 to 8 year permit process. So those projects tend to be larger scale, more expensive, more time consuming. The Chesapeake Bay program, the states have goals of 191,000 acres of tree plantings in the region, which is just a massive scale. That's over 40 million trees. And we're never going to get there if everyone is doing a stream restoration project and needing to go get a Corps permit. So we're exclusively focused on vegetation and tree planting. There are times when we plant things other than trees, such as, small shrubs and seed mixes and things like that help, increase biodiversity. But we're typically only focused on tree planting as an activity.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's a bit of a tangent, but yeah, I think one of the approaches we take in the county is we get a blanket permit to do a certain amount of stormwater restoration, limited stream restoration work, but it'd be good to have other jurisdictions adopt that kind of model so that we can get these things done. They're for the public good, so I think we need to make them as easy as possible. So a bit of a tangent, but if you do see any improvements that you think we could make to the code, please let us know. There are some exemptions in the code for restoration activities, but if you know of anything offhand, feel free to let us know at any time.
Yeah, I really like the work that Eric Michelson's been doing in Anne Arundel County. I think he's gotten the costs down and improved outcomes. And are you speaking specifically about the city code?
Yeah, and we did just incorporate we now have a fully funded forest program for the city, and we made it a part of our watershed restoration fund. So it's the first time we've had an actual dedicated revenue stream for the entirety of the forest program, because it's been cut year after year for the past decade or more. So, it might be worth at some point, maybe if the board invites the arborist, you could have probably a good conversation with our staff about that program, because he's going to be looking at, and Jackie as well, as far as where we could do tree plantings in the city, because we do have an aggressive tree canopy goal that we are trying to meet. As a part of that, we did include funding to go towards potentially towards nonprofits to help assist us in that reforestation effort, because we realize it can't just be government alone, but also money to support a maintenance of existing buffers that we
Absolutely.
have, right?
Yeah, I
And
mean,
that's-
seeing the Save Our Trees effort
Yeah,
that's come through,
exactly,
and
yeah.
that's been great, helping trim down invasives. And yeah, Brian, he gave a good presentation at the public library a few months back, and I think he's got really good goals, and seeing those programs grow, and not for nothing. I mean, at the Germantown Elementary School System, I'm a member of the Germantown Homewood Community Association, and there's 7 acres of essentially grass that's not being used for park. It's not being used for sports. It's not being used for school. It's just mowed every year. So it's an expense for the school system. So finding a way to have more coordination between the county and the city for that particular property, because it's very urban. And I mean, 7 acres is a lot of trees, as you may know.
Yeah, and
So
that's
finding little opportunities like that where
Yeah.
some coordination might be beneficial.
No, exactly, and that's something we've had a conversation with Mr. Adams about is finding some flexibility. Typically, conservation easements are perpetual, but in perpetuity. But I think we need to look at possibly reducing the amount of time, but also requiring mitigation if you have to remove a tree. I think that would allow some more flexibility and comfort to some entities, like including the school district, to allow some additional planting on their property.
That
But in
would
any
be
case, that's something I think the Conservancy Board will certainly be involved in, and they are oriented more towards, I think, maintaining our existing easements. But that in itself, I've mentioned this. I think the chair is Mr. Turner now. If you ever have reports you want to give to this committee, we certainly welcome it, or recommendations, or if you need resources for that body, just let us know and we can take that under consideration.
fantastic.
But in any case, I've taken up enough time. Is there a motion?
I move that we recommend favorably.
Second?
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? All right. Motion carries. You'll probably be on the agenda for the next council meeting, but there's no need to attend. So after the next meeting, I guess you'll get sworn in at some point. Miss Jackson here will get in touch.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you
Thank you for your interest.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very nice to meet you.
Yeah.
All right, next up on the agenda, we're going to jump into legislation. We have R4624. It's the task force to study residential maritime vessels. Before jumping into this, I just want to lay out a few. First of all, anybody raise your hand if you're here because you want to give some sort of public comment? Or are you just here to listen? Anybody here to testify? Raise your hand. There we have one person. Okay. So I will give you an opportunity, just 2 minutes, because I want to focus on the body's deliberation, but I will give you some chance to speak. As far as this legislation, I want to focus. I know there's a lot in it, but I'd like to focus on the environmental aspect. And so, and as far as if we want to make changes to the task force or give further guidance to, presuming it passes, to the task force that we want, further questions that we want them to look into besides what's already written. I'd prefer, I think, the body not get into the merits and arguments as far as houseboats, and rather focus on what the questions are we want to get further information on.
Madam Chair, then I have a question.
Yes.
If we're only going to act on the information in this resolution that speaks to environmental issues, then we're not going to take a position on the entire legislation, or are we? I'm not clear on how we would only focus our interest on one part of the legislation.
Well, I think like we do with other legislation, I think we would make a recommendation on the whole thing, one way or another. But I do just want it to be through the lens of an environmental analysis. So you know, so I think in that regard, I think there are some things that we could focus on as far as if we have enough guidance, questions in here as far as sewer, I think, and water quality are some of the questions. As far as noise, probably as well, might be another environmental area that we could focus in on as far as what other, and there may be some other things that the body may want to talk about. But that would be, yeah, that's kind of my inclination.
I'm still not clear on how we can approve or disapprove pieces of this when we're taking this as an entire body of legislation.
Yeah, it's not just pieces. It's just like if we got a resolution dealing with City Dock, I'd want to focus on the environmental aspect of that and not get into parking or economics, right? Because that's a different committee.
Then we will not take a position on the entire legislation then.
No, we will. It's just, again, it's through the lens, like we do with everything else. It's through, is there another way I can explain this?
I understand what you're trying to tell me. I absolutely do understand.
I just don't want to go off talking about things that are not germane to this body. We have a certain lens we like to look through things through as an environmental committee. I think we could leave the other non-environmental questions to the other committees to dig into if they want.
Can I ask a question that might, I think, speak to your question and my question too? I think the committee that has the direct overall purview on this is Rules Committee. I don't mind I do have 4 different types of environmental questions that I'm raising because I think they're things that we need the task force to consider. But I think your question is an interesting one. What is the output from this committee? And the thrust, Mr. Chair, that I'm hearing is that we would make recommendations to make sure that the task force is properly encompassing all of the potential environmental concerns?
Yeah, again, it's like every other piece of legislation, we try to focus on that aspect. So I don't see why we would not give a recommendation for the overall legislation from our perspective, the environment.
Well, I don't think that that's how we generally conduct ourselves. When we give a recommendation on a piece of legislation, it's a piece of legislation as a whole. And we usually amend in or out things that respective committees cannot live with. So that's what I expect that we're going to do. We're going to just focus, and we will take out everything that's irrelevant to this committee for our recommendation. Or at least that would be my hope. Because in other words, we're endorsing everything, even though we're only supporting one certain aspects of it. And I see it's a strategy. But if we're going to make a recommendation, then it's on the entire piece of legislation.
It's not a strategy. I feel like that's how I've approached all legislation that's come before the body. I try not to have us go askew too much, because sometimes legislation goes to economic matters, sometimes it goes to us, and that's how we've treated it in economic matters, is we look at things through just like when we talked about the drive-through ban, we focused on the economic analysis of that legislation and then made a recommendation from that regard. The environment, just like this case, the environmental committee would recommend from an environmental perspective that we don't see any issue with this legislation from our perspective, and recommend its or not its passage.
I will have an opportunity to speak when it comes to that.
That's fine. I figured I'll always give you an opportunity to speak to it. But, so in any case, before I give the public a chance to say anything, does staff want to say anything else as far as introduction or information that you've provided?
Jackie Guile, Deputy City Manager for Resilience and Sustainability. No, you have our staff report, and I think we covered all the issues in that staff report. If you have any questions regarding that, I can answer them now.
I'm having trouble understanding what you're saying.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm
Is
sorry.
your mic on?
Yes, it's on. Okay.
There.
Louder. There we go. I provided a staff report. I thought it was very thorough, and so if you have any questions regarding that, I can answer those questions now. I don't have any other comments, though, at this time.
Okay, well, actually, before we get into that, I will give the public a chance to speak, and then we'll come
Okay.
back so we can focus on our discussion. If you would like to testify, feel free to come up to the podium and give you a few minutes. Just state your name and address for the record, please.
Bill Sweetser, 5 Shipwright Harbor, Yonkers.
That might be, and I can't,
It's on or it's not?
it's not.
Could you please make sure to turn the mic on?
Should be bright green.
So green,
Bright green?
Madeline can't hear him though, so he has to sleep.
now it's bright. Can you hear me all right?
Mr. Riker, could you speak closer to the mic? They're saying in the studio they can't hear you still. Yeah,
How about
might
that?
be helpful.
Any better?
Better.
Okay, and I'll try to speak a little louder. Chairman Rob Savage and Alderwoman Finlayson and Alderman Ross, I'd like to talk a little about it. I think I'm in the right place because I want to talk about not just the concept of the task force, and I am here really to support the task force and everything that's in R46-24. But R46-24 calls for this whole piece of legislation to be referred to the Maritime Advisory Board, Port Wardens, and this committee here and others. So I maybe am here at the right time. There's a lot of impact on the environment that would come from if the task force signals that we should have houseboats in Annapolis. There's a lot that comes from that. And I know that shouldn't be my main thrust, because the main thrust should be, let's find out whether there will be houseboats in Annapolis. But if there are, there's some new studies that have come out in recent years that are showing that when you take a big piece of cover over the water, 20 feet wide, 46 feet long, 30 feet high, you build a cover like a awning over the water. And the most recent study that I've read is a University of Delaware study that is dated 2021, but it goes into the detail of how the nitrogen, hydrogen in the water are good for the water or sometimes bad for the water. They have to be the right combination to keep the fish from living and the crabs from living. And if we go overboard and put too much of an umbrella over our waterways, we will suffer consequences. And there's no question about that if the mix isn't what it should be. It might make it better, it might make it worse, but there's been no study to see whether that's going to be an impact, and I think it will be. So I'm introducing that, this is the Delaware study, just as a piece of evidence that would someday become a fact when we go into the task force. And that's why I brought that. But as I looked through that, I stumbled across a bunch of questions that really make sense, that will have a bearing, and they fall in the category of the environment. This won't take that long, but safety, does that fall under the umbrella of of this committee? If there is unsafe conditions in the environment? Or would that be a different committee?
To the environment, you can offer your
Well, okay,
testimony.
well,
Go ahead.
What about the Coast Guard certifications of all these boats and the potential that if those certifications aren't made properly and enforced properly, there could be safety issues? That's why the Coast Guard has those regulations, and they're very detailed, and they must be enforced. So one thing I think about is, I haven't found that the city is really good at enforcing things. As one example, I'm a boater. I've never seen any radar or anyone pulled over for going too fast out of the harbor. And when that happens, they rock all the boats that are in the nearby slips. So I'm only using that as one example, but I see many other examples that I could bring up, but I don't want to take the time to do. Is that a 3-minute thing? Or
Is that 2 or 3 minutes?
my time's up?
Oh, you get 1 more minute.
Pardon me?
Get 1 more minute.
1 more minute, thank you. So we have to keep in mind when we talk about the pros and the cons and the task force work, that there are costs and expenses that we will be faced with that we don't have right now when we do some of these things. That could be one, should I go to the economic meeting, I could bring up, because economics enter into a lot of this. So to wrap up then, I will say I would like to leave a copy of this study with you. It's something that I don't think has come to the attention of the task force. It's not been, I guess the task force hasn't been agreed upon and started yet, but it is something that when the task force is formed, it would be a good piece of factual evidence. And I checked it with Alderman Harry Huntley today, and he says that this is a peer-reviewed scientific study. So he's seen it. And so thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, please leave that with,
Shall I leave this on the table?
yeah.
Could we all get copies, please?
You can keep it. Made an extra.
Anybody else?
Good afternoon. I'm Amy Clemens, 17 Southgate Avenue in Annapolis. My only comment is that I'm in favor of the task force in order to look at the environmental impacts of the houseboats. Since no one yet knows what those environmental impacts are, maybe someone does, but I don't know them, and I don't know that this committee or the council knows those impacts. And I would urge the creation of a task force in order to find out what those impacts would be, so that we know going forward, instead of passing some legislation that we regret later. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. So back to our discussion, and if you look at the task force legislation, it does have a number of items that are related to the environment. On page 5, lines 24 through 27, talks about utilities and water quality, determining the impact on water quality from discharged gray water into city waters and recommend solutions. And then the next on bullet, determine how marinas would handle potable water and sewage disposal from residential marine vessels. So this is primarily having to do with gray water discharge, sewage. Is there anything on this particular item that committee would have thoughts on, or that we would like more information on?
I have 4 environmental matters that I think, sewerage is one, and it's twofold. One is our capacity to pump out these boats. I understand some of them can have fairly large holding tanks, which is good in the sense that they don't need as frequent a pump out, but when they do need it, they're going to need something with a high capacity. But
The pump out boats?
yeah, but I'm concerned about effluent going overboard. And so that's a different kind of thing. That's where sewage is going directly into the waters. There's another kind of material that can go overboard, so-called gray water, which could be water out of the sinks for washing dishes and things like that. If these have washer and dryers, are they going to be directly discharging those kinds of things into the waters, and what would be the impacts of things like that? And I think that's just a matter of finding the facts about the description of the kind of houseboats and what their requirements are. Some marinas, particularly the bigger ones, do have pump-out facilities. You and I were at one on Monday where they actually have a pump-out cart that will come down the dock and pump out boats. And so that may be taken care of, but I just think we need to find out about that. I've heard discussion of these kinds of houseboats being hard plumbed to the shoreline, and I don't know whether that's feasible or not, but more importantly, I'm thinking about tides going up and down and winds going back and forth, and also pipes freezing. So I really would like to know more, and this is basically the kinds of certification materials on how the houseboats are constructed and then how they're connected. There is an ancillary question: if they're connected, are they paying a sewer connect fee? And who's paying for the handling of all of that sewage? So I think there's a number of questions about both sewerage and gray water that are just factual questions. I don't think that they're questions that say yes or no to houseboats. It's just things we need to know. I do have some questions about the impact of houseboats, which would occupy virtually all of any particular slip, on sunlight getting down and its impact on water below, life below the water. I know that the Maryland Department of Environment does not allow boat sheds to be built anymore because of the lack of sunlight being able to get through and get to the water. House barges are different than a monohull and even a big catamaran in that they really are a rectangular box over the water. So there may not be any damage. I'm interested in the study that Mr. Sweetser brought us, and be interesting to see if that sheds any light. And then noise is sort of in a gray area, but noise pollution, the dissemination of noise across the water, and particularly from more elevated locations. Some of these houseboats have patios on the top of them, which raises them up. I'm having an issue on the land side at Safe Harbor where they've raised their dockside bar, and now all of a sudden the noise is propagating into the neighborhood and across the water. Ironically enough, affecting Mr. Butler and his neighborhood. And so I had a meeting with the neighbors over that noise pollution concern of them. So while I don't think it's environmental in the sense of particulates in the water or something like that, or in the air, I think noise pollution is something that I would want to hear more about. And to me, that speaks to the fundamental, and I will just briefly talk about the general concept of the task force. I mean, the task force is a fact-gathering body, but I think also it's intended to be that, and an information-gathering body. So it will allow us to look at particular things, environment, when we get to the Economic Matters Committee, I think we'll look at economic impacts. When we get to rules, we'll look at the overall impact on code and things like that. But it is intended to be a fact-finding and advisory body. It has a specified membership. I'm certainly not opposed to the number 15 for the membership is something that certainly can be debated by our council committees. The composition, I think we have a reasonably, I'm on page 4 of the resolution, reasonably broad set of representative groups that we're asking that they be balanced, that it not be overweighted in one direction or another. It will be staffed by the harbor master and the planning department. I think we've already gotten a dose of information today from the harbor master. So we're ahead of the game in terms of getting some of the data, and hold regular meetings. Now, I did hear at the council when this was introduced at first reader that maybe this committee's being given too long a time to get their work done. And I'd like to have this information next month if we had it all collected and evaluated and there for us to look at. So I'm not going to oppose consideration about the length of time for the task force. But I do think that it is a group of people that we can ask, just like we did on the Maritime Advisory Board, just like we're doing now with the small marinas, just like we did, as you mentioned, Alderwoman Finlayson, when we were looking at a location for the Public Works facility. I mean, this is pretty much the kind of thing that we do across the board when we have something new being introduced and has some controversial aspects to it. We ask a group of people to take a look at it, gather information, and offer advice. And for that reason, I certainly am sponsoring this committee, and I think it has a valuable contribution to make. And I would really like us to get going.
Do you have any comments?
I absolutely do. Thank you very much. I was going to respond to each of your comments, but I didn't get the attention of the chair, so that's okay. Again, I'll say it's unfortunate that we didn't open this discussion and be able to bring in this information before it was necessary to write a resolution to do so. First of all, we are missing the staffing impact statement. I'm not sure how this got through as a piece of legislation without that, because clearly there is going to be impact on staff. The staffing impact statement is not the same as a staffing report. I am somewhat surprised that the harbor master is not here and did not write the staff report for this piece of legislation. I thought we were counting on the various departments to give us their professional input in those staffing reports. So I'm interested in hearing from the harbor master particularly. And I suspect she has the answer for many of the questions that Alderman Arnett has posed to us. And so, and the legislation does speak to the fact that she is to oversee it along with the planning director, which is fine, but we could have that information today. We could have had it 2 months ago when this discussion began. We didn't. But I am very concerned that this has grown and we are putting so much into this legislation, this resolution, that this committee is not going to be able to get their work done in 6 months, which is what the amendment proposes from Alderman Gay. And I don't know how we narrow this to specifics or to divide it into subsets so that we can get some things moving on it. But it's like, I don't want to use the analogy of throwing everything into the kitchen sink, but that's kind of what it feels like. because you open one door and there are other things we can also consider. You know, I am supportive of a task force that is going to help us understand why certain types of vehicles or boating apparatus are not welcomed in the city of Annapolis. And, you know, with each of those defining types that were listed in the legislation, they all come with a whole cadre of, this is our planning director. Would you reach him and tell him? Is he on his way here? Is that what it is?
I'm trying to get him. So he's probably.
And he's
Oh, yeah.
calling me now. Sorry about that. So it's only your phone that needs to ring now. Alderman Arnett's has rung, mine has rung not once but twice from staff. So anyway, that's my concern. I think we need and I don't want to belabor this because I too want to get this out the door so that they can get to work on a limited timeline. But I don't want to give them so much that it's not attainable. And that is my concern. So that's my comment. Thank you.
And just to
If I
clarify,
may,
the staff impacts are in the,
Yeah, if I may, I did in my staff report include the staff impacts. This Harbor Master's office does report to me. So I consulted with them and all the other departments which are identified in the task force resolution, trying to get some idea of what we would approximately, how much time we would need to put into this, because the amended resolution added some additional topics from the first iteration. It was about 14 topics initially, and I believe it's 22 topics that were identified in the second amended iteration of the resolution. So it expanded somewhat, and it included more staff after I looked at it a second time. So my estimate was about 300 staff hours, and included planning and zoning, finance, the Office of Law, the city manager's office, and the harbor master's office. With the harbor master, it changed to the harbor master leading the task force with the director of Department of Planning and Zoning or his designee from the Department of Planning and Zoning, along with the other stakeholders from the public. So we did estimate who would be involved and what the staff time would be based on the content of the resolution. So we did the best task analysis of impact to staff we could from the information what we were given.
I know you understand what we had approved when we decided to add a staffing impact statement.
Yep.
So
But if I understand what you meant, but that was, not provided.
okay, so we do need a separate staffing impact statement.
From our staff
And
report,
now
right.
that you've outlined it, it should be broken down by department. Because according to what you just said, 4, 5, 6 different departments
Right.
are going to be impacted by this.
Exactly.
So we need an accurate picture of what
yeah.
that is going to take in order to accomplish this.
And I do
That's
think
the purpose.
we could do this in less than a year. How much time exactly, but a year seems like a long time to do this work in. If you were to try to taper down the amount of topics we covered, I don't know, if we were just going to address houseboats, we could just do that rather than liveaboards, which seems to be something that's been tacked on to this legislation. So,
Well, I guess I hearken back to the original legislation that the mayor was not happy with because it took on, it did not go in the direction that he wanted it to go as the original sponsor. And so I don't see, he sent it back to the Office of Law to be rewritten. And I'm not sure that we've gotten any closer to what he was looking for in his original request for this legislation. So anyway, that's neither here nor there because we have the resolution in front of us. But we do need a staffing impact statement, and we do need Ms. Bellis here to help us understand many of the questions that Alderman Arnett has raised.
okay. I mean, if that's the committee's desire to postpone action, we could do that. I mean, I'd also like to, touch on it. As far as pulling out liveaboards, I think honestly, I don't want to have to deal with liveaboards much.
Me either.
But it's hard. I think it's important to understand the difference between, I'm still trying to understand the difference between a houseboat, a liveaboard, and a charter, because I've heard people refer to, including owner of Marina, refer to the houseboats as charters, and then also refer to them as short-term rentals. So I think it's hard to really separate it out, unfortunately. But if you have other recommendations as far as specific items we could pull out, I mean, because on the other hand, I'm also like listening to Alderman Arnett. I have a list of things to potentially add in here, which would be, but if we have more time, I can work these up in a proper amendment.
There was one issue that Alderman Arnett raised, and it's about the hard plumbing and the hard electrical, which I think I can clarify for you. So in some jurisdictions that do have houseboats or house barges, however you wish to characterize them, they do require that these vessels or homes be hard plumbed or hard electrical to the shore. Other cases, they do not. But there's pros and cons of both. In some cases, when they are hard plumbed and there's hard electricity, they're safer. They're deemed safer. They're more like a regular home. However, in those cases, they cannot push away from the dock readily. So there have been some really horrible instances of fires, and they can't get away from the dock, and then other vessels at the dock catch fire, or the dock itself catches fire, and then you have a catastrophic event. So there's pros and cons on both sides of that. In other instances, it's environmentally, more friendly, obviously, to have you hard plumbed. Your gray water and your black water is taken care of in a much more environmentally safe manner. That way you don't rely on a pump out. Some marinas are required to have pump outs. If you have vessels of 22 feet and longer and you have 50 slips or more, you're required by Maryland law to have a working pump out. Not all marinas always have a working pump out. Our pump out boat is supposed to be used only for recreational vessels. That's the DNR grant. And so these are not recreational vessels if they stay in one place and they're being used as a short-term rental. That's not a recreational vessel. Now, our harbor master, if they get a call, they don't say no, usually, to anyone, but they're not supposed to be using them that way. And also, these larger vessels very quickly fill up our pump out boat's tank. So that's not a good use of their time. If they have to return, pump out, they can't service the truly recreational vessels they're supposed to be servicing. So that's really not a good use or a proper use of our pump out boat. So the marinas would have to have working pump outs for these vessels. So, and then another point to the plumbing and the pump out is that currently, under our permitting process for house barges, we're treating them under our permitting process as a residential occupancy use permit. That's what requires the hard plumbing and the hard electrical. So unless they fall within one of our exemptions, they have to get a residential occupancy permit. It puts them in that loop, and unless they're hard plumbed and hard electrified, they can't get a permit. And they're just stuck in that loop of, I'm applying for a permit, I can't get a permit. And around you go, and they can't get a permit unless they fall within an exemption.
So if I may, I think
I heard Alderwoman.
Oh, I'm
Did
sorry.
you?
Well, she's answering your question, so I'll.
Yeah, but I think this is what gives me comfort. If we want to shorten the time frame, I think there is a body of information and work that has been done by the assistant city manager and the harbor master. This data release that we got. I think the things that you said about it being house, hard plumbed, hard whatever, and not being mobile, speak to some of the very issues that we need to get into. Are these really boats, or are they houses that happen to be floating? And how are we going to deal with that when we actually get the legislation? I am not at all worried that we're not going to get a lot of information pretty much immediately. And that's why the amendment to shorten the time span doesn't bother me a bit. And as I said, I'd rather know it sooner than later anyway. And then what that does is lay out to us the hard policy questions that we're going to have to come to grips with, which is, are these boats that need to be in the water? Are these houses that don't necessarily need to be in the water? And how are we defining all of that? So I'm pretty comfortable we can get the information we need.
And I agree. The information is available, and we just need to gather it. You know, we are going on anecdote instead of data. You know, definitions of all of these types of vehicles should be an industry standard. We shouldn't have to create a definition for any of these things. And just because it's in Annapolis doesn't make it any different from Baltimore, Washington, or New York City. So why don't we just use the industry standard for these definitions?
Well,
why don't we use the industry standard for how these vehicles are operated, allowed? You know, there are options for everything. So why can't we just outline what these options are and decide which ones we want to use in the city, as opposed to, you know, what people here think? We need the accurate information.
Well, I think it's tricky because as, you know, again, listening to the investors behind the boats, the house barges that have raised this whole question, they're specifically designed to get around existing definitions. That's why in Baltimore they're defined, permitted as hotels. Elsewhere they're permitted as short-term rentals, residential. That's the tricky part, is they're deliberately designed to not be easily defined, and so
that tells me that we know what the obstacles are. If we see how Baltimore has gotten around their rules, then we build it in so we don't do that. You know, I don't think that we take the standard that they've set, which is an unacceptable standard, obviously, and make it a norm. If they skirt the issues, then we make sure our code does not skirt the issues.
well, that's what this is all about.
Well, yes, it is, but we'll see. Because we know what they are. And
I honestly don't. I've heard them called a charter by the owner. I've heard them called short-term rentals. If it's a charter, it's not a houseboat. And that's like,
I'm not
it's all,
arguing with you.
but that's
So
what we need to get clarity on.
Let's define it. Let's define it once and
That's
for all.
what we're trying to do with this. I don't understand why you're arguing about it. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, I did. Well, my point was that not all jurisdictions define a houseboat or a house barge the same way. There is no industry standard. So you will look at different cities, they will use a different definition. So we do need to define it. We need to pick our definition and define it.
But
That was the point I was going to make.
And what is it in this legislation?
Well, we don't know.
We don't know.
You just said you didn't know why I was arguing, because it's here. Show me where it is. It's
But
not in the
I'm
legislation.
saying that the whole purpose is to create a task force to help us define it. Because depending on what it actually is and how it's actually defined, it could have incredible impacts on our maritime industry. And that's why Ross and I are so adamant about wanting to do this, is because this would be an incredible impact on our wards. I understand that you know somebody who owns a marina, but this is going to impact hundreds of our constituents.
We're not talking one, so don't be okay? That's what you think you know. That's not
But I've
accurate.
also spoken to a marina owner in my ward who has zero interest in opening up this can of worms. So Alderman, you had your hand up.
Well, I really wanted to reinforce what I think Alderwoman Finlayson is saying. Getting these different standards, but all of these factual things out of the way quickly allows us to get down to focusing on the policy. And to me, the real value added of having the task force is having various groups, boaters, residents, marinas, et cetera, mulling with this over the information, which I think we really can get fairly quickly, and giving us their recommendation. And that's why the resolution says specifically a balanced cohort of different interest groups. And it is that input, just like we got the input for the Maritime Task Force. Are we ever going to see the one from the small marinas? I don't know. But we listened to hear from the people, and it was made up of a whole group, including residents, including big marine owners, small marinas, et cetera, and they mulled over the data and came to us with their sense of it, their recommendation. And that's really the bottom line for me, is let's hear what the people have to say.
Well, that's how this all started. I'm not going to say that again. That's how this all started, before it leaped to a resolution. But this is where we are.
Well, it started with an ordinance that none of us knew about.
Yes. So,
Well,
all right,
it
I wanna-
started
I wanna
before the ordinance.
Stay focused.
Mr. Chair,
We have items I want to get into specifically. I mentioned the two bullets on page 5 dealing with utilities and water quality. Alderman Arnett had a potential, sounds like, addition to that, which again, I would like to propose at some point, determine if houseboats should be hardwired into sewer system or served by pump out services, and potential risks or benefits to either approach.
That's a new bullet?
That's, just based on what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah.
Another one would say, assess the capacity of pump out boats and how this would impact that service. And then we have underneath community, page 5, line 29, it says report on the impact residential marine vessels might have on boat passage through city waterways, with a focus on narrow and busy channels next to marina slips. Not necessarily environmental, but I think when you're talking about the channel, we might be able to, I don't know if people have any thoughts on that one. There's another bullet right below that on page 6, line 1, develop recommendations for addressing the economic impact of marine residential and commercial vessels on the community, such as noise impacts, safety issues, and slip prices. Of particular note, I think, is just the
I don't know where you
noise
are.
impacts. Page 6 of the,
I'm on page 6,
Line
line 1
one.
says community for me.
community's on the bottom of page 5.
Oh, okay.
yours is formatted differently.
Yeah, well, of course.
Oh, you have a different, it says draft.
Oh, okay, maybe I don't have the most up to date. All right.
but
I also don't have an iPad because it died. But that's
Well, the text is probably roughly the same, but is there anything else regarding noise impacts that they might need to add in here to look at?
Well, I mean, when we get to the actual legislation, I'm actually dealing, as I said earlier, with a noise impact on land from an elevated surface at a marina. And one of the things that I want to talk to that marina about is, are there sound barriers that they can put up to buffer? Are there the same kinds of things that we can put to buffer on the decks of the patio on the top of these houseboats? Things propagate 5 times more over water than they do on land because there's nothing to interfere. There's no houses, trees, etc. And so this could be a very serious impediment. Under the current legislation, where these houseboats have been allowed for 8 years now, they're largely in the industrial area on your side of Back Creek. These are really targeted to be right in the middle of neighborhoods. And I think that neighbors and the impacts on neighborhoods has to be given some consideration. And noise is one of the biggest things, to wit, the landside noise problem that I'm dealing with. There's a landside noise problem with 2 of the different restaurants in my ward. One of which is on the water and the other which is in the middle of a block. But so all of those things are things that I think would need to go into the legislation in terms of buffering and make a sound and so forth.
So what I think we could add is after, it says, develop recommendations as far as addressing impacts such as noise impacts. We could say after that, such as noise impacts and potential mitigation measures.
Yeah.
So they can look into a little bit as far as screening.
Same kind of things that we're talking about in the outdoor dining
Yeah, exactly,
legislation.
yeah. And then another environmental issue, bullet, page 6, line 15, under city operations, it talks about addressing environmental concerns, including water quality, waste disposal, and habitat protection. I'm trying to find a place for your comments and gentleman's comments who testified about, I do think it would be helpful to look into more, because for some of these houseboats, they're larger flat bottoms presumably, so I do wonder if they're going to have some kind of increased impact on blocking the sun from submerged aquatic vegetation, or
Isn't
I didn't
isn't
realize
that habitat?
Yeah, you could call that habitat. So I'll have to give it some thought to see if it might be worth specifying under habitat.
Right.
But along those lines, I would be inclined to add up on page 4, line 1, with the membership is the addition of a creek association
No.
or watershed, because I think that might be helpful to have on there as far as addressing some of these environmental concerns or questions. So are there any other changes that the committee might want to recommend to this?
I stated the environmental concerns that I had questions about, and I think they're covered. You've added the notion of questions about hard plumbed and questions about pump out capacity. I think those are very specific.
So do we want to add those today, or is there a desire to postpone this until we get harbor master and staff report?
I'm not desirous of postponing.
I don't want to postpone it either. I'm just disappointed, I'll say, that we didn't see fit to make sure the people in the room could give us the information we need.
What
But I don't
information
want
do you
it-
need
I want the harbor master here.
to address what, though?
I already went into it, so I'm not going to repeat
Well, because
myself.
again, our point here is not to answer questions. Our point is to identify questions for, so I mean, but you could have reached out to her before. I did invite her a couple days.
It's not my place to reach out to you. You chair the committee, and I just thought that she would be present because this is.
What can I
Okay,
do?
well,
I asked.
anyway, it's neither here nor there. I don't want to delay it. And Alderman Arnett, if you're willing to make your amendments, I will support those amendments to get them into the legislation.
Right, okay, I can make, Ms. Jackson, would it be easier for me to email these to you and the committee, or do you want me to read them out loud, or both?
You have to say them, and then we have to vote on them, but you can also say them.
Okay, so I will read these out and then send these to you, assuming we get a vote on it. All right, so the first one would be, do you have an extra copy of the legislation? Anybody? Does anybody have a printed copy?
Well, I have this, I'm not,
Well, if you want to look, page 4, line 8, which is the list of
Yes.
task force members, it would be adding a new, so it'd be page 4, line
would
8,
be-
a new
H,
H, which would say, quote, watershed or creek association. And then,
did you say also or environmental group?
no, I think
No,
just.
all right, so watershed or creek.
We have enough watershed organizations, I think we'll be fine. Hopefully one of them can help out. And then the next one will be page 5, line 27. A new bullet
This
That
is
would
under
be
utilities and
under
water.
utilities and water quality, correct? It'd be a third bullet that would say, quote, determine if houseboats should be hardwired into a sewer system or served by pump out services and potential risks or benefits of either approach.
Okay,
And then I'm waiting until Miss Jackson's typing is finished.
Sorry.
It's okay. And then page 5. Okay, same location, page 5, line 27, be a fourth bullet that says, this is underneath utilities and water quality, that reads, assess capacity of pump out boats and how this would impact that service. I guess I should state that this would, I guess maybe we should state it would be houseboats, right? Assess capacity of pump out boats and how houseboats would impact that service.
and then the last one you mentioned was on page 6,
Yeah,
under city operations.
page 6, line 2, under city operations, after noise impacts, insert, quote, and potential mitigation measures.
What line?
That'd be line 2 on page 6. And I think that's it, right? Those, unless there's, yeah, that's it. So that'd be 4 committee amendments or 1,
No, it'll
One
just be
amendment.
the Committee amendment.
committee amendment 1, okay. Is there a motion for those amendments?
I'll make that motion.
I will second it.
Okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. All right, do you need me to email those to you, or do you got them, Ms. Jackson?
I can just watch it again. I have the
Okay.
position here and stuff.
Okay.
Are we going to make a motion to recommend with amendment?
yes,
Or are we waiting for,
I would like one, but
I'll make that motion.
Is the motion to recommend as amended
Yes,
R46?
right.
I'll second it.
all right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Did we want to take a stance on the timeline, or just not?
Actually, we
Not
do have an
involved.
amendment,
Yeah.
and I would move that amendment.
I'll second it.
Any discussion of the gay amendment 1? It changes it from 12 months to 6 months deadline. So that would be, what would the month be? Well, I guess it depends on when it gets adopted. Okay, so any discussion on that amendment?
Well, I mean, it's a necessary amendment. If we did not have this amendment, then the work of the committee would be beyond the scope of this current council.
I agree.
And so 6 months is adequate, or it should be hopefully adequate, to get the information that's needed.
All right, any other discussion? And you made a motion, right? It was seconded. So all those in favor of recommending the Alderman Gay amendment number 2?
Aye.
Please say aye.
Aye.
Abstain? All those opposed?
And
Motion
Mr. Chair,
carries.
it's Amendment 1. Ours is Amendment 2.
Correct.
There-
Yeah,
okay.
you got that. Okay. All right, I don't think there's any other action on that legislation. Did you have anything else you wanted to say on that?
Do we have to take another motion? Because we moved it with 1 amendment, and now we have 2 amendments
Recommended favorably as amended.
as amended.
Yes, just-
Okay.
Okay. All right. So we have so we're finished with that item on the agenda. We're going to move on to, I guess since Mr. Kubrick is not here, we're going to move on to resilience update.
I thought he was coming. Okay.
Well, and on that, for the committee's sake, what I'd like to do in the future, I know our directors all have a limited time, is I want to try to get the spreadsheet of projects ahead of time, and then we could let him know which projects we might want updates on, to see if we need him to come in or not. I think that might be a bit more
I don't know what you're doing.
Getting Chris number.
efficient.
And just, I was going to add that for the, any impacts on submerged aquatic vegetation or other environmental impacts of house barges, I did do some research just with the Maryland Department of the Environment to see if they have any regulations or policies with regard to house barges, houseboats, floating homes, however they are characterized, and they could not find anything about regulations concerning houseboats or house barges.
Yeah, we could look at, we did see some houseboats over in the Netherlands. I wonder,
I'm talking about the Maryland Department of the Environment.
yeah, I'm just wondering if they have any research over in the Netherlands on houseboats impacts to habitat.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah, so I was just looking specifically at Maryland, whether we have any regulations pertaining to them, and we do not specifically to houseboats. Because I thought, there might be a correlation because of their size because we do prohibit any further construction of boat sheds, but we're not looking at the house barges separately. So they're just being treated, I guess, just like any other boats.
But I guess the question is, are houseboats analogous to a boat shed?
MDE is not treating them that way.
What do you mean,
MDE is not treating them that way.
The boats,
shed?
like in Saros Petrini, they used to have those big
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
sheds
yeah.
that
A
the
little-
boats would park
I was
underneath.
No.
Thinking,
And I can, that was just research, so I can call, ask and try to find someone to speak to see what the thinking is there and, behind it, if they've thought about it any further, because this is now becoming more and more prolific, the spread of floating homes and house barges, and especially in Baltimore. See if they've thought about it anymore.
Right.
It's becoming a newer thing in Maryland, and Ocean City had to look at it, and they decided to outlaw them there.
But for the
I don't want to
legend,
get too far afield here to get back into that issue.
Okay.
So,
I'll ask separately, but I want to know why DME is outlawing boat sheds, because it seems to me that the same kinds of impact on habitat could be a possibility with a houseboat as well. If you have 6 houseboats along a set of slips, how's that different than having a boat shed over 6 slips?
yeah, it's a good.
Yeah, they may just be differentiating it between something that's movable and floating, thinking it's no different than a large sailboat, a large catamaran, a large motorboat. But, yeah.
You're
so-
right. Movable is kind of an operative
I know,
word there, isn't
movable.
it?
Can we move on to the rest of your update?
Yep, sure. All right, so I'll just hit some of the highlights since I have this in written form as well. So our greenhouse gas emissions inventory and climate action plan, RFP, is going to be put out for bids. We've had it ready in RFP form since July, but the legislative process gave us a hand by now allowing projects that are $50,000 just to be put out for 3 bids. So we didn't have to wait on the procurement office anymore. And so that is going to go out for bid now. So we'll be moving along with that update. We'll have a community emissions update, a government facilities building update, and we'll come up with a reduction emissions plan for the city and the community. And that's a $50,000 earmarked for that project. The pollinator habitat, the solar park project is moving along. We've had our contractor out there taking soil samples, walking the property, finding where planting areas are best suited, what kinds of plants are going to be best suited. So they're starting to do that analysis. We walked the property with them in late October. We're looking at probably about $6,000 per acre there, which fits within our budget for the first year. So they're coming up with the design and analysis plan from which then we will decide where to plant, what to plant, and be able to project how much it will cost to plant the entire area over a period of time. And they will give us that plan, where to plant, what to plant, how much it will cost over what period of years. That will be the end product of this first phase.
But clearly, we don't have enough money budgeted right now. It's
For the
$6,000.
entire project. So we have $100,000 for this year. This first project was we had about $25,000, I think it's $25,000 allocated for this first design phase. So then we'll have about $75,000 for the planning phase in this year's budget. Then we'll need further funds in subsequent years to do other phases of planting. We'll do phases of planting, but we'll have a design with a budget for all the phases out of this first phase.
And that will be going into the budget process that's about to.
Right, and we'll have this phase done in the next couple of months, so we'll know what we're asking for in FY '26. Okay, the City Ferry Electric project, we had 10 proposals come in. One was disqualified because they were a foreign company. So with this, under the Jones Act, we have to have US manufacturers. So we had 9 proposals come in for the City Electric Ferry, which we evaluated in late October, and we have selected 5 companies for inviting them to submit further proposals, their best and finals and interviews, which are scheduled for, we've sent out invitations, which we will invite them to do their interviews in early December. Meanwhile, Anne Arundel County was successful in their application for a similar ferry project, which I reported on last time. And we had a meeting in late October with Anne Arundel County concerning their landing sites in Annapolis for the county ferry, which would tie into the Annapolis ferry. So they would have a landing site in Annapolis, and they also were looking for a storage site in Annapolis. So it would be a busy harbor. Well, we're having the city ferry, the county ferry, and eventually the Chesapeake Bay ferry, the one that will go over to St. Michael's and Baltimore and point south. And there will be in coordination with the harbor master's office. So we're going to have a very busy harbor and a very busy harbor master's office. So the next step, we'll be meeting again in November, getting together with the harbor master to walk sites to show that this was a virtual meeting, to show them sites that we were talking about, and to develop an MOU with the Office of Law to coordinate where landing sites can be, what the actual relationship will be with the city, with the county, to coordinate the ferries.
Yeah, that's great news, because I know, as I showed some of my colleagues at the committee meeting last night, but
You're right.
we had that ferry that used to, back in the 1910 and 1900s, early 1900s, a ferry that went to the end of King George. It was called the Annapolis Claiborne Ferry Slip.
Yeah, the Claiborne Ferry Slip,
And,
right.
So it's not unprecedented in
Yeah.
Annapolis.
So the county ferry would go close to Baltimore, to Mattapique landing on Kent Island, and then to Annapolis. And eventually they may add on, they may have other stops eventually, but that's their beginning. Their grant was to buy 2 ferries, electric ferries, and to utilize existing landings. I think the Mattapique landing still exists. I don't know what kind of shape it's in, but it still exists in some form. And the landing we're thinking about for our ferry, the one we're planning to use besides the 5th Street in Eastport on the city dock site, is pretty much where the DNR dock is pretty much where that Claiborne ferry was landing. And all the more reason to extend it out a little bit if it's going to be utilized for both the county and the city. We've been speaking to the Naval Academy about perhaps extending a boardwalk as a promenade around the wall, the Navy wall. We've been talking to them about that for a while. They have some security concerns that probably are not insurmountable, but all the more reason to do that, because if we're going to have 2 active ferries there, it makes even more sense to do that. But then it would also be a promenade, and it may solve some problems that have cropped up during the boat show with a lot of people coming in on their little Zodiacs and piling up at the Prince George's site and it's not just doubling up, but 4 or 5 boats out and then scrambling over the boats. So instead, some people go along the seawall and then they climb over the Navy wall, which is a big federal no-no. So we met with the boat show a couple weeks ago to try to come up with a solution to that. But this, if we could extend that walkway, we could also use that to tie up during boat show too. So it could solve multiple problems.
Are you familiar, I don't know, I think it was supposed to have come out yesterday, an editorial in Annapolis about the ferry boats?
No, I didn't see that.
Okay, well, I got it in an email, so I don't typically look at Annapolis, but this strikes exactly at what was being negatively commented on about trips to the Netherlands and Sweden, but also the ferries. And they brought up the Adams Act or whatever it is about domestic. We're having domestic people doing it. We're having the county involved in this at a much larger scale. I don't know whether the administration engages in response to editorials, but all of the information in here speaks directly to the kinds of things that were being portrayed negatively in that editorial. So,
Yeah, I'll look for that.
Want to mention it to Mitchell?
Yeah. Okay. We've also worked, the Conservancy Board has also been working on to improve the accuracy of our conservation easements and our online resources. We have quite a few where we either don't have them online, they're unidentified, or the conservation easements, the boundaries are not available. We've been fortunately working with, there's a Chesapeake Climate and Conservation Corps intern that was working with Diane Butler and her group, the re-entry program. We're doing work to, they were removing invasives, but they weren't sure if they could go on certain properties. And they ran into this problem on our conservation uses, how this all came to light. So she had her intern doing a lot of research for her and helped us with some of our boundaries on our easements. So we're working to get online a better inventory of where our easements are. In that process, we have found that some of them need to be recorded, surveyed. As I found out through the Office of Law, we don't necessarily have a budget for all of that, so we might need some budget in the next, funds in the next budget for the Office of Law to do some of that work so that we have some things properly recorded so we don't run into any issues in the future with conservation easements, like we have in some in the past. But that's good that we have a number of them that we weren't even aware of, so we can get those on the map and put them online. The resilience plan that we talked about at the last meeting, we've made very good progress with that. We basically have an outline. We've gone through all of our hazard mitigation, flood planning, cultural resource plans, the comprehensive plan, and have basically made an outline of where they have resilience elements and where there are gaps. So we have a very rough outline of what a resilience plan might look like, and from there, we're ready to start putting together a plan. And so I think we could do that in the next couple of months and have that ready. We can talk about that at our next meeting. I don't know, do we meet in December?
On the 12th.
Yeah.
We do?
12.
Okay. Yeah, we could, Dylan started putting together a PowerPoint, but I told him we probably wouldn't have time during this meeting to present it, so we can do that at our next meeting on the resilience plan, what we have done so far on it. Meanwhile, the city was invited to participate in resilience action planning with the University of Maryland. The University of Maryland's Environmental Finance Center has put together this action planning for Maryland's coastal communities project. And what it is about is trying to strengthen the resilience of 8 of the most vulnerable coastal jurisdictions, focusing on nature-based solutions and fish and wildlife habitats. So what these participating jurisdictions will do will participate in a 3-month resilience seminar, planning seminars, and after which they will provide us some direct assistance with vulnerability mapping and project planning and connecting to funding and technical resources for us. and work on resilience work plans. So what they asked us, each jurisdiction, to provide as far as staffing was one staff member, one elected official, and one community member who was a member of a community organization linked to disadvantaged communities. So Dylan is going to be our staff member. We have a to-be-determined elected official to participate, and Randy Rowell, who has a group called Breaking Boundaries, is going to be our community person who's linked to disadvantaged communities that will be participating. So out of that will become a resilience work plan that is based around nature-based solutions, mostly geared around flooding. So we're talking about protecting coastal communities. So that starts, they have a kickoff meeting, I believe, next week on that plan. And let's see. What else is going on? Lots of things going on. Oh, and one other thing I'm starting to work on is, as we get, go ahead.
Is there something, anything you want
Are you talking to me?
yeah, is there anything you want to ask about on the developments?
No. It was on the agenda, so he was going to come and speak to it, but I don't.
What's that?
We're just, we're trying to determine if we want the planning director to come.
Oh,
He can come over in a few minutes.
He can speak, put it on the next agenda. I mean, is there
Yeah,
urgency
I
for
didn't
it?
see anything. It's hard to know if there's anything new on the sheet. I
Yeah.
didn't see anything that jumped out at me.
Is there
I
anything that's
did,
pressing, time sensitive? I don't think so.
I did ask him today about the status of the shopping center in Providence Point, and I think we are getting close to those clearing the legal hurdles. One of the
If we
things
don't
for,
put any more barriers in the way.
well, one of the things for Providence Point is that the judge is being asked if there's any more suits, we want the people that are suing to bear the legal costs.
And that's what my
Yeah.
ordinance would do. But that's another.
So he's available to come over now for a few minutes. I guess it sounds like the committee doesn't have too much of a desire at the moment.
I don't think
We
it
just put him on the next agenda, it's fine.
He's had a long day.
Yeah, talking with you.
Yep.
All right, sorry, Jackie.
that's okay. So is Chris coming? Or-
No.
No, he's not coming? Okay. All right. So we've also applied for technical assistance to assess the structural integrity of our parking lots and buildings for solar retrofits. We've applied to the Maryland Energy Administration through their Solar Technical Assistance Program. So we're waiting on final selections for that program. So we're looking at Knight's Parking Garage, GOTS, the Pick Moyer parking lot, Eastport Fire Station, the Taylor Fire Station, the water treatment plant, and Pitt Moyer and the Stanton Community Center. And so we're potentially, those are areas that could have solar retrofits on their roofs. And then the last one I'm looking at for sustainability retrofit is if we go to closing on 25 Shaw Street, looking at that total building for sustainability, as we go to remodel that building to suit our purposes, is looking at that total building as for sustainability retrofit. So looking at insulation, heating and cooling, potential for solar there, definitely for EV infrastructure for charging in the parking lot, stormwater controls in the parking lot, if we have to replace windows, anything for energy efficiency, materials we're using, and to look at Public Works' budget, so this might have to be done in phases. But anytime and anywhere we get a building, we should be looking to retrofit it in a sustainable manner. So I'll be making recommendations on that. We haven't closed on it yet, but I'm already putting together a list.
Yeah, we should be able to get grant money for,
There is grant money available for some of these things, yes.
great.
And that's it.
That's it. All right, any questions?
I did have a question on page 4, the gas-powered leaf blowers. And I'm wondering where we are with the buyback or reimbursement part of that program?
So, we spoke about this at the last meeting about a voucher program, and, there were several different options and ways to go with that. We talked about one option would be to do a voucher program where we would provide a buyback, a rebate, almost like a voucher for a discount for buying electric-powered leaf blowers. So you could get a voucher for $1,000 to $1,500, depending on where we want to do with that. And we could do that as a 3-year program. So over time, they could be buying more and adding more to their inventory of electric leaf blowers. We could support them for about up to 3 years. And we could combine that with a residential program where we could provide vouchers. One way to do it would be $100 vouchers or $50 vouchers. We could do it if we gave vouchers to every single residential home. I think that would cost us that would be much more expensive, like $680,000. If we gave it to a limited number in each ward, like a lottery system, it would be about $6,800. So we looked at it if we did it a limited number of homes in each ward, because we know that not everybody's going to elect to do this anyway. It would be about $105,000. That's the first year. That's not 3 years of supporting all the businesses just in Annapolis. Because we talked about supporting businesses outside of Annapolis as well. We just were supporting the businesses in Annapolis and a limited number of homes in each ward. It would, and the administration costs, if we had a third-party administrator, because I also discussed having the Resilience Authority administer the program so we could avoid the staff burden. It would be about $105,000 the first year we did this.
Is that going to be specifically in this coming budget?
We could, if that's what we did now in this budget.
Oh, it's in the current budget?
It's not in the budget.
Oh, no, well,
It's
that's
not.
why I want
No.
to make sure. If we're
We would have to find the money to do this.
Yes.
It's not in the budget. The other thing is, I spoke to the Resilience Authority. They said that they're willing and able to do this. It would just take them a little time to get it together. They realistically predict, because they're working on another big project right now for the city and the county with a deadline of December 4th, they probably are not going to work on this until December for us. Probably looking at March, April before they really could get this up and running for us. So we would have to delay enforcement as well, realistically.
I think we would
until we could get a voucher program up and running and support people with this.
Did you comment?
I do. It seems like we're hearing the same thing over and over. Why wouldn't we just set aside an X number of dollars and say the first people who come forward requesting the vouchers, they get them? I mean, we're not going to get this off the ground.
We could do it that way too.
Yeah.
But we're not moving, is what I'm
Let's set
saying.
aside the money. If the programs don't develop, it'll fall to fund balance. But let's make sure we have the money and flexibility.
We have some of the money in the sense that we have that environmental position which was funded but not filled for half a year now.
That's
That
true.
money's in the budget. You could just reallocate a portion of it. I mean,
I wanna
that's
fill
probably
that.
around $50,000 or more.
That's true.
So.
Yeah.
That'll at least get a start for the next 6 months but we also have potential, we have options. There's potential one-time use money. There's the annexation money, which we haven't used yet. So, that's.
I just want to make sure that we don't get to going to implement a program and then find out we don't have the money earmarked for it.
Yeah.
And I don't
agree.
want to do the float.
I think we need to get a
I'd
fund
rather us
transfer.
hire that environmental staff person quickly and not play the float. But
Yeah.
I did have one last question, and it's the very last item, and I am very concerned every time I boat around Back Creek and Spa Creek, I look at that erosion, and identifying the erosion is one thing, addressing the erosion is another. So how soon will we have a plan to, particularly there around Truxton Park?
Yeah. So Truxton Park is a huge project. That erosion as Amy knows, it happens every time it rains, it turns orange in Spa Creek. That is a project that's, I know that Department of Planning and Zoning put in a request to NIFWF for a grant. They will apply again next year. There was a holdup because they would also have to get an Army Corps of Engineers. They would have to get an Army Corps permit, and that was like an 18-month process. It was tied to the Hawkins Cove project. We didn't want to hold up the Hawkins Cove project, so we deferred on that particular grant and said we would resubmit for the next year. And that's what we're planning to do, because the shore erosion is a high priority. One thing that we're moving forward with is moving the Mid-Atlantic Off-Road Trail enthusiasts that we've been working with on other trails are working to move the trails over and away from the shore, so that some of those highly erodible trails that are on the edge are not used, and then we'll have to rope them off, direct people to other areas so they're not continuing to use those. And as part of that project, I worked with Eric on, we need to direct people to other areas. There's some social trails that go down to the water people are using to fish on, and perhaps building some better fishing platforms so we can direct people to certain areas and not make their own trails, because people are just continuing to erode out the soil that are holding the trees together and that are holding the soil that's left there, because that area just needs to heal. We need plants to hold it together and hold the soil there. It's going to be a very expensive project. So we do need as much grant funding as possible. We will be continuing to pursue grants on those projects, but meanwhile, we can move people away from the areas they're using right now that continue to erode out the banks.
Yeah, I hope it has some urgency, because aside from what it's doing to silt in the creek,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just horrible to look at.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions? All right, hearing none, I think that concludes our business. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Before we adjourn, Mr. Chair, I have to make a statement. I'm a very passionate person about everything that I do. And I don't appreciate being labeled as angry. I'm not angry, okay? I have every right to ask any question that I need to ask about any piece of legislation or any other business in the city. And likewise, I have every right to represent whomever I choose to in the city. And people from all walks of life and all wards come to me for assistance. And I never turn anyone away. But I will not be labeled by you or anyone else as angry, because I have a right to ask questions. And I would appreciate you giving me the same respect I give you. You bring issues before us because one person came to you. That wasn't the case with me, but you wouldn't know that because we haven't talked about it. But I have a right, just like everyone else does, to serve our community however I deem best without offending anyone. And if I offend you, then I do apologize, because that's not my intent. But I am passionate, and you've worked with me long enough to know that by now. So I just want to be clear. I'm not angry. I don't appreciate being labeled that way. And I don't appreciate saying you have friends you're going to represent. Irrelevant. Irrelevant. So, thank you.
Yeah, I know I did not intend an insult in that, but I will say I am frustrated as well, because this was not brought to my attention when you were working on that ordinance before you brought that forward and set up that meeting in City Hall. This is an issue that, again, is going to have significant impacts potentially on my ward, having between Ross and I with the most slips. And I'd be honest, it does feel like you're getting involved in our wards without really talking to us about these potential impacts. And that if I was to butt into your ward, you would be livid with me.
Well, let me be very
Right?
clear.
And if I hadn't reached out to you before, so yeah, I am a bit upset myself, and you can call me angry about it. I haven't been angry about it.
Well, let me be very clear.
Because you would be so upset with me if I
And you're
did that.
absolutely right. And you're absolutely right. But let me be clear for the third or fourth time. I did not get involved with this in an effort to address concerns in every ward, yours particularly. I got involved because of Ross's ward. And when I was asked to try to buffer an issue with Ward 8, I called the alderman from Ward 8. And we sat down and had a meeting. There was never any intent to include you in that because it wasn't about you and your ward. So please do not describe it as me leaving you out. And you could have likewise, when you learned about it, called before you showed up at the second meeting.
I found out the day
But
before
wait a minute,
from you, and that legislation would have impacted my ward.
I had no clue
That
there.
legislation would have impacted my
Well,
ward.
let me say again, we didn't even see the legislation. Was it the second meeting? We finally got the legislation, did not even know the legislation was written. And Mr. Mayor came to that meeting and said, this is not the legislation I asked for. So there was never an intent, and you seem hell-bent on believing that there was, but there was never an intent to leave you out or to alienate your ward. This was the issue that was in Ward 8, okay? And so, no, I did not come into your ward and attempt to address an issue. That is not how I conduct business. I go to the person who represents that ward, and I share the information even before I take it to staff, because that's how I operate, and that's the respect I show my colleagues. So don't ever try to insinuate that I do other than that, because I never have, and I would not do that.
Well, that's the first I've heard that my ward was not going to be impacted by
Well, you
this.
should have asked if you thought that that was the case.
I've been involved. You never said that to me this whole time.
But
was whole
your
time.
ward is going to be involved. And I don't know when you got involved, Alderwoman, but.
It was in
it
July, I think, or something.
This started in June of 2023. And that's why I was shocked, and I had no inkling until you approached me to meet with the marina owner at the marina. And then, as you know, I've told you, that burgeoned into meeting with a whole bunch of marina owners and their attorney and the city attorney. And it felt to me like everybody was ready to go past that legislation. And but this is high anxiety stuff. And it is high anxiety in my ward and will continue to be high anxiety in my ward because we're going to be living with this. It's going to be right. It's not going to be in your ward. It's not going to be in Ward 1. It's going to be in our ward next to our houses. And so I hope you appreciate there is a high level of anxiety about this. And there's a high level of anxiety about trying to push this through quickly because our minds are made up we're going to do this. So, there's angst all the way around. And it really is impacting more than just whether people make a business decision. It's impacting the entirety of recreational boating and the nature of maritime in the city of Annapolis, the very thing that we just got through looking at in 2021 with the ordinance 02521. And we're still looking at with this small marina, which I have no idea what that's doing, and it's sort of out there wagging its tail. And I guess the leader of its last day is tomorrow. Stephen Rice's last day, so I have no idea where that's going, but
Stephen Rice's last day is tomorrow?
Yeah.
All right, is-
I wasn't aware of
is
that.
there anything
That's
else
unfortunate.
for the
We
good of
keep-
the
Well,
order?
this is the good of the order. We're airing, we're
And it is,
speaking our
because the
mind.
community totally misunderstands, because they've been led by misinformation. And that's why I'm making my statement now. And
I've never heard until now that
Well,
this wasn't going to
that's-
impact my ward, and it's been working on for months now. I've never
You were
heard
at
that.
the meeting.
I know, and
You
it never came up that, Rob, you don't need to be here, it's not going to impact your ward. Never.
It is going to affect you.
Yeah, I know, that's as it was written. I've never heard anything from you or Gavin or
You
anybody.
both sat in the
Jackie.
meeting, I thought, with the legislation. We sent that legislation back to the law department
And where
to
was
be
it
rewritten.
limited to Ward 8 in that legislation?
The whole piece of legislation was flawed.
Yeah.
The entire piece of legislation was flawed. And the mayor sat in that meeting and said, this is not the intent. And we never saw the revised legislation until this resolution. So surely, as much as
You haven't seen
you,
the revised legislation.
well, what I'm saying is this is as close to, and it's not. But we never did see it.
Yeah.
You're absolutely correct.
Well, I mean, regardless, I think this is still an important exercise, even if it's just going to impact Ward 8.
It's not.
Well,
gonna hit that word.
It's not leaving out anybody now
I
that
have
it's
not closed the meeting yet. I
ballooned
haven't had-
into what it is.
Is there a
Motion, we adjourn.
second? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.